Thank you very much, Jim, for those very kind words. And when he said the cards are on the table, I thought he was going to mean that, well, he's from California, so be careful. So it's great to be here in the Midwest, in the heart of the country, where people are more down to earth and fewer crazy ideas than from where I herald. So I'm going to put this slide up, and I'll put it on at the end in case you want any resources. You can scan the QR code or go to our website, stenoinstitute.org, and look at the resources page, and you'll find all of our peer-reviewed articles there. And for those of you who are not medical professionals, you'll find a lot of lay articles there and some videos, a lot of great information for those of you who are interested in abortion pill reversal. Now, I want to start with how I got started in this, and I think a lot of it had to do with the Holy Spirit using ordinary people sometimes to do extraordinary things. And all of us know that. We've seen that in our lives, and certainly those of you who are physicians in these very difficult times, you know that we're being called to be really extra special and to do more than perhaps what we signed up for when we signed up for our training. And those of you who have other walks of life, we're also called to spread the word, and I ask you to spread the word about abortion pill reversal to all those you meet. I was practicing family medicine in San Diego back in 2011 when I got a phone call from a sidewalk counselor in Bakersfield, California by the name of Terry Palmquist. And Terry was a very devout pro-life worker who would sidewalk counsel and at the same time would carry a cell phone. And she had a website called Lifesavers, and people would call her from all over the country and ask her for her advice and seek support from her, and she would give it. On this particular day, Terry called me, like she sometimes did, to seek some medical advice because she's not a medical person. And she said, well, I have a lady who called me from El Paso, Texas, who took mifepristone, started her chemical abortion, and now has changed her mind and wants to stop her abortion. Can you help? And I said, well, that's a tough one, Terry. I've never heard of anyone stopping or reversing a chemical abortion. I said, but let me think about this. And I stopped and stepped aside from the patients I was seeing. And the Holy Spirit really put two and two together in my mind because I had had the training in naprotechnology from the Pope Paul VI Institute. And I knew I had treated many people, pregnant women who had threatened miscarriages where they were pregnant and they're starting to cramp and spot and it looked like they might miscarry, and they had low progesterone levels. And some of these women, if you treat them with progesterone, bring those levels up, you can save the baby. At the same time, I had an interest in mifepristone, the chemical abortion, then known as RU46 more commonly, since before it was even approved in the US in the year 2000. So I knew how it worked, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. And I knew that it blocked the way progesterone works. So I thought, well, although the progesterone levels may not be low, although parenthetically they sometimes are low because of the mifepristone itself, but we won't have time to get into that today. But it was really a kind of a functional low progesterone state where the mifepristone was not allowing the progesterone to do what it's supposed to do. So I thought, well, this is kind of like a threatened miscarriage situation with low progesterone levels. So maybe if I give supplemental progesterone, I can outcompete that mifepristone at the receptor site until the chemical abortifacient washes out. So I said to Terry, well, Terry, I have an idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's worth a try. So that was the idea. That was the first challenge. The second challenge was that this patient was in El Paso, Texas, so I had to find a doctor pretty quickly in El Paso who knew how to use progesterone, was willing to treat progesterone, was really willing to take a step out of the, quote, standard of care and do something very novel to save the life of a baby and help a woman save her spiritual life. So I found a doctor in El Paso who had also gone through naprotechnology training, Dr. Jonalyn Bellacura. And I called her up. I didn't know her. She didn't know me from Adam. I said, hello, Dr. Bellacura. I have a patient who needs your help in your city. Are you willing to help? And she listened, and she was willing to help. And so right then on the fly, I came up with the first protocol. And back then, we were using more injections of progesterone. And she agreed to give the injected progesterone in that fashion. And I thought, okay, that was great. I thought I had done my good deed. I went on to see the patients the rest of the day. A couple of weeks later, Dr. Bellacour gave me a call and told me, hey, this baby's still alive. I think we averted the chemical abortion. So I thought, well, wow, that's wonderful, that's great. And I thought, well, maybe we did it, or maybe it just happened on its own. Maybe just the abortifacient didn't work. Because we know that those of us who are people of science know that you can't come to a conclusion based on one case, especially when sometimes the chemical abortion fails. But I went along my way, and people started hearing about this case and calling me, asking for advice. And I would tell them what we had done and told them the protocol we'd used, and they started to use it. And then I had my own patient in San Diego, who, for those of you who are priests or seminarians, interestingly, came to me through a priest. A very, very interesting story showing how much influence you can have on those in the confessional. Her mother had taken her to the abortion center and then had regretted that. And so she went to confession, and she confessed this sin of helping her daughter obtain an abortion. Well, the priest said, well, how long ago was it? And she said, well, it was just yesterday. He said, well, do you know about abortion pill reversal? And I was really surprised to know that this priest already knew about it so early in the game, really. And so he told her about me, and she called me, and she said, are you willing to help? And I said, sure, I'm willing to help. She said, okay, well, my daughter doesn't really want to reverse her abortion, though. So I said, okay, well, we have to have her consent. She said, well, is it okay if she calls you? And I said, sure, that's okay. So she called me. I started talking to her, and she hung up the phone on me. So I thought, oh, this is not good. But I thought, well, why don't I just play innocent and play dumb? I'm going to call her back. And I said, oh, we must have been disconnected. So she said, no, we weren't disconnected. I disconnected you. But she stayed on the phone, and we talked some more, and I finally convinced her to come into the office. And it was a Friday night. My wife and I were out to dinner with my daughter and her husband, who were in town visiting. So my wife and I broke away. My wife's a nurse, so she came with me. And we met her and her boyfriend, the father of the baby. She was a student at San Diego State University, and of course was worried about her collegiate career and her future if she had this, quote, unplanned pregnancy go to term. So she really was fighting it, but her boyfriend, the father of the baby, this is so important, wanted her to stop the abortion. He wanted to save that baby. He wanted to save his own child. He was standing up for life. He was, at this point, being a real leader, which is something we really need in the pro-life movement today. We need to encourage men to step up and take up their rightful roles as servant leaders of these new families that they've created, and not just step aside and say, oh no, it's her choice. No, that's abdicating the authority, the leadership role that men have been given. Well, he was taking the mantle of his leadership, and he brought her there. So she was still fighting it, but she said, okay, I'll let you do an ultrasound. Put the ultrasound transducer on her. Saw the baby moving, saw a heartbeat. She immediately started crying, really tears of joy and tears of repentance. At that moment, she decided, I'm going to fight to save this baby. So she went from being the killer of her preborn baby to now being the savior of her preborn baby. These are the wonderful transformations that we see with abortion pill reversal and that we saw that night. So I treated her, and thanks be to God, we were able to save her baby. And now I had my own case. I had a case in El Paso, a few others I'd heard about, and I thought, well, maybe we really are onto something. And that's when we decided to write our first article, which we published in the peer-reviewed literature. At that time, describing 6 cases, 4 out of 6 were successful reversals. So now let's look at the pro-life landscape in the United States since the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And we can see here, of course, that we have these gray states. Gray is for sad. And you can see on the coast, the crazy land of California, as well as New York, Illinois, and a few others, are places where they support abortion almost without limitations. And then you have the blue states and the yellow states, which are the pro-life states. And your state is, of course, included in that. A little bit in a sea of liberality there, but nonetheless holding your own. And you have Ohio here. Ohio, of course, is a great case study on how not to conduct campaigns to defeat initiatives that open the door to abortion on demand anytime, all the way up to the time of birth. Ohio, relatively conservative, quite a pro-life state. Unfortunately, forces from outside came in, brought in millions and millions of dollars, and they passed this, this proposition that now makes Ohio, in terms of abortion, as liberal as California and New York. So they're going to be coming to your state, so be careful. They're going to come to all the pro-life states, and they have a concerted effort. They have a playbook. So it's important for all of you to learn about what happened in Ohio so that that doesn't happen here anymore. So what's happened in the last several years, and this has been accelerated by the Dobbs case, is that there's been a trend towards more and more chemical abortions. And we now are at the point where probably about 65% of all abortions in the US are chemical abortions, no longer surgical abortions. In Nebraska, where I just was a couple of weeks ago giving a talk, there, because surgical abortions are much more limited, they're finding that about 75% of their abortions are chemical abortions in Nebraska. And that's really where we're headed. In countries like Scotland and other European countries, it's 80 up to 90% of all abortions are chemical abortions. So this is what really we have facing us. And you can see these data are just to 2020, but the recent estimates are more like 65%. And now, because of the Biden administration, under the auspices of, or the guise of the COVID pandemic, but of course the COVID pandemic is long gone, right? They haven't reversed these new policies. The Biden administration allowed the suspension of the REMS. The REMS were special restrictions put on mifepristone when it was approved because they knew that it really hadn't been studied adequately, and because the inherent dangers in the chemical abortion. Well, there were certain restrictions that, first of all, it could only be used initially up to 9 weeks of gestation. Now it's 10 weeks. Initially, you had to go in and get the medication face-to-face, take it in the presence of a clinic worker, and then you had to have an ultrasound, and initially you had to have a follow-up appointment. Well, little by little, they've whittled away at this. And so now, because of the new restrictions being lifted, that you don't have to go in to get the mifepristone in a clinic, and you don't have to take it in front of anyone else. And now you know that Walgreens and CVS are going to be offering it like any other drug from their pharmacies, where any doctor can write a prescription and it can be dispensed to a woman. But the more dangerous thing is that we have a proliferation of telemedicine and mail order abortions. So telemedicine abortion is where the woman goes online, has a televisit like this woman is having there, talks to someone virtually who takes a history, and then goes ahead and approves the medication. While the mail order is you go on a website, you might answer a few questions, and you can lie that you're a woman, and they mail it to you right then and there without even any face-to-face contact. So a lot of dangers with this. The risks are going to catch up to us, and it's going to be a really big problem. First of all, there's a risk of incorrect dating of pregnancies without ultrasound. Now, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists states in one of their practice bulletins that it's essential for prenatal care to have an ultrasound because we can't trust women to remember the first day of their last menstrual period, which is the traditional way of dating a pregnancy. So they say it's absolutely important, so every woman should have an ultrasound to confirm her dating. However, when it comes to chemical abortion, they say, well, ultrasound's really not important. You don't have to have an ultrasound. So they don't really care about the dating if a woman's going to be aborting her baby. But what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that what if a woman is past 10 weeks and doesn't know it, and she takes the chemical abortifacient, and then she has bleeding and spotting, and she thinks this is par for the course, but really it leads to an incomplete abortion, and she has severe complications of infection because the baby is not expelled. Or what about women who misinterpret their pregnancy tests and really aren't pregnant, think they are. They go on the mail order and they order it and it's sent to them and they take it and they're not even pregnant. That's never been studied. We don't know what's going to happen to these women who take it unnecessarily because they haven't had an ultrasound. And what about a woman who has an IUD in place, an intrauterine device? There is an absolute contraindication to using mifepristone for chemical abortion if the woman has an IUD in place. But I've known many women who've forgotten about IUDs are in place. I've done pap smears and I've looked and there's a little string hanging out of the cervix. Oh, you have an IUD. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I'm sure it's happened to you. Oh, those of you who are OBGYNs, probably it's happened to you, Jim. Well, these women may take it and then the second pill cause strong uterine contractions, and that could cause laceration or tearing of the cervix as the IUD is expelled. What about tubal pregnancies? We know that about 0.5% of all pregnancies in the US are tubal pregnancies, where the baby doesn't make it down into the uterus and plants in the fallopian tube. That is a very dangerous place for a preborn baby to be. And we know if those women don't receive prompt medical attention, if they start cramping or bleeding, that the tube can rupture and the woman can bleed. So this is a true medical emergency. Well, a woman has been told that she may bleed a lot and have a lot of cramping with the chemical abortion pill, which they do. Maybe of you have seen the movie Unplanned with the story of Abby Johnson. That scene in the bathroom with the blood all over, that was not an exaggerated scene. That's a typical scene of what happens when these women have their abortions in their bathrooms. Well, let's say a woman doesn't know she has a tubal pregnancy, goes online, doesn't have an ultrasound, takes the mifepristone, and then takes the misoprostol. She starts cramping and bleeding. She thinks, okay, this is par for the course. She cramps and bleeds more. She doesn't seek medical attention because she thinks this is what's supposed to happen. And then her tube ruptures, she bleeds out, and she dies on the floor of her own bathroom. We've seen these, and we're going to see these more because the abortionists, because ACOG, because Planned Parenthood, because ACLU do not really care about the health of women. They don't care to empower women. They only care about their agenda. And their agenda is that abortion is a great good, and the more, the better. The next medical complication is a woman who is Rh negative. Now, all of us here, most of us here are Rh positive, that's our blood type, but about 15% of all Americans are Rh negative. So by chance, maybe 15% of us will be Rh negative, and therefore 15% of pregnant women are Rh negative. What's the big deal about that? Well, whenever the body sees a protein that is foreign, that isn't part of itself, it mounts an immune response, and that's good. That's why we can take care of bacteria and viruses and other invaders that invade our bodies, right? Well, a woman who is Rh negative means she does not have the little Rh protein on the surface of her red blood cells. And because she doesn't have that, if she gets, let's say, a blood transfusion with Rh positive blood, she'll have a significant, what's called a transfusion reaction. Her immune system sees that foreign and goes after it like gangbusters. Well, in pregnancy, there's always a little bit of mixing of the blood. And during an abortion, there's an increased chance of mixing of the blood. The baby's blood seeps into the mother's, and the mother's seeps into the baby's. And so what happens if a woman has an abortion and she does it on telemedicine, she's not checked for her Rh status and doesn't know she's Rh negative, and her preborn baby is Rh positive, well then her immune system will be alerted and she will mount an immune response. Now for that abortion right there and for that preborn baby, it's probably not going to be anything that she notices. But what about our immune systems? Does everybody know about immune memory? Have you heard of that, right? Those of you who are non-medical? Yeah, so we have memory. And that's good. So that way, if I get a pneumococcal pneumonia today, next year I'm exposed to the same serotype, my immune system takes care of it, I don't get sick with a pneumonia a second time. That's very good. Well, the next pregnancy, the next wanted pregnancy, let's say that baby is also Rh positive. Well, then the second exposure leads to a bigger immune response. And what happens with this is that the woman will be doomed to stillbirth after stillbirth with every Rh positive pregnancy for the rest of her life if she does not get that shot called RhoGAM at the time of her abortion. And if she goes on telemedicine, she will not get that special treatment, and therefore her immune system will be alerted and will be sensitized. How about the social risks of telemedicine and mail order abortion? Well, we're going to have more instances of coercion. The mifepristone will be the tool of sex traffickers, of child molesters, and of rapists. Because we don't know if the woman on the other side of that computer doing the telemedicine encounter actually has a man sitting next to her holding a gun or just looking at her in a menacing fashion. Or we don't know on the mail order abortion if the person typing in the answers to the questions is really a man, or maybe a woman who's helping a man. Either way, these drugs are going to get into the hands of nefarious actors who are going to use them for their gain, for sex trafficking, to cover up rape, to cover up child molestation. So these are the important bottom lines I want you to take home today as we talk more about mifepristone reversal. Is that mifepristone and other chemical abortions are equivalent to traditional surgical abortions. The big difference, of course, is that with surgical abortion, once the instrument enters the uterus, that's it, the game's over. But with chemical abortion, we now have the ability for women who want a second chance at life to reverse their chemical abortions. Before I go any further, I want to show this video of a very happy person who was able to reverse her chemical abortion.
I discovered I was pregnant for the second time when I was just about 19 years old. I had my first child at 18 years old, so the thought of having 2 children at 19 years old led me to believe that I needed to have an abortion with my second child. I visited an abortion clinic. I wasn't really told what was going to be happening to my body, wasn't allowed to see my baby on a monitor. I was basically told that my chemical abortion was going to be quick, convenient, easy to hide, all things that I needed. And I took the first RU486 pill. As I sat outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic, literally after just taking the abortion pill, I immediately felt regret and like I needed to try to stop what I just started. I searched on my phone and found abortionpillreversal.com. They had a hotline number that advised anyone who had wanted to reverse the abortion pill, who had recently taken it, to call. After I called the hotline, a nurse answered named Debbie, and she basically told me that there was still hope for me and my baby, but that I just needed to get progesterone into my body and continue with injections of progesterone for several weeks following the abortion pill. Planned Parenthood told me that this likely would not work and my child could very well be deformed. These words replayed in my head for the rest of my pregnancy. I was very scared, but after I saw my son on the ultrasound and heard his heartbeat, I was filled with hope and encouragement, and I just knew that God had intervened and that I still had a chance to save my son, and I was just extremely happy and grateful. I look at Zechariah and I'm just so thankful. I feel blessed that he's here because I know that it wasn't likely that he would be, that I had tried to abort him. I just look at him and I could not imagine my life without him. What I like most about being a mom is coming home to my kids. They're always so excited to see me. It's mommy, mommy, and that makes you feel so good. And just looking at them, I would never give up. They're the reason I go to school, the reason I go to work. I just have so much to live for, and I love that. Abortion is not a magic eraser. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And raising children, being a mom, no matter how young you are, or the difficulties you're going through in life, is still a blessing. And for anyone who's considering reversing their abortion, I would encourage you, and I would be happy to support you and walk with you and talk to you and give you the encouragement that you're going to need on that journey. I've known many women that have regretted their abortions, but I've never known one that has regretted choosing life for their child, because you don't. You love being a mom and you love those children once they're here.
So as you probably know, there are 2 drugs in the cocktail. The first is the mifepristone, used to be known as RU486. And mifepristone, what it does is it blocks the effects of progesterone, and then, which we'll describe in a few minutes, it leads to the demise of the baby. 24 to 48 hours later, the second drug, misoprostol, also known as Cytotec, is given. and it's very effective at causing uterine contractions in order to expel the remains of the preborn baby. So because there are two drugs in the cocktail, it gives us a window of opportunity. We have progesterone, which is the antidote to mifepristone. We do not, as of yet, have an antidote to the misoprostol, which is a prostaglandin analog. So we really have to treat these women before they've taken the second drug. So that's the window of opportunity, after the mifepristone has been taken, but before the misoprostol is taken. Dr. Ballou was a French physician who is known as the father of mifepristone. And in one of his interviews, he said that we were seeking to find a false key. And for those of you who are not medical, and for those of you who are medical, you remember the lock and key hypothesis back from medical school. Well, think about a hormone as being a key. And a key fits into a lock. The lock is the receptor. The key turns the lock, and you're able to open a door. The opening of the door is the hormone effect. In the case of progesterone, the good things that progesterone does, even before the woman is pregnant, it's actually doing great things in the body. First of all, it's preparing the lining of the uterus so that it's thick and luxuriant, so that the 5 to 7 day preborn human embryo can implant into the wall of the uterus. Second, it decreases uterine contractions. It makes the uterus nice and soft and relaxed. Why? Because the uterus has to stretch as the baby grows. If you have a very twitchy uterus, like a cramp in your calf that you get sometimes in the middle of the night, well, that's not going to be good for the baby. You want it to be nice and relaxed. Third, it causes the development of the maternal part of the placenta, which is called the decidua basalis. The decidua basalis is a very, very thin component of the placenta. Most of the placenta comes from the baby, from the chorion. However, that decidua basalis is extremely important in order to have very firm adherence. I call it the super glue of the placenta. The placenta has to be very, very well adhered to the wall of the uterus so that the nutrients can come from the mother and the waste products can go from the baby to the mother and go out. So without that progesterone keeping the decidua basalis as a very strong superglue, you get separation of the placenta from the wall of the uterus. And that's what causes the chemical abortion. When the placenta separates from the wall of the uterus, then the baby no longer gets the nutrition and is starved and dehydrated to death, essentially. The other things that the progesterone does that are very important, it keeps the cervix closed like a biologic valve because the uterus is intended to be a sanctuary, a protection from the outside world. And the design is that nothing from the outside world should interact with the inside world. It should only be the mother interacting physiologically with the preborn baby. So how many of you have had the experience of putting a key into a lock that fit into the lock, but it didn't turn the lock? Right? A little frustrating, right? So that's the false key. That's exactly what the mifepristone does. It fits onto the receptor, but it does not activate the receptor. You have that false key so the lock doesn't turn, so you cannot open the door. The hormone effect does not take place. So all those good effects of the progesterone are blocked because the receptors are being blocked and the progesterone can't get there. So most importantly, the placenta starts to separate from the wall of the uterus because that superglue is dissolved. The decidua basalis is not supported by the progesterone. And the other things that occur, of course, the uterine muscle starts to get twitchy because the progesterone is no longer relaxing it. Another effect of the progesterone is that it inhibits the production of natural prostaglandins in the body. Those natural prostaglandins, when they're no longer inhibited, then they lead to very strong uterine contractions and to softening and opening of the cervix. So that's what the mifepristone does by blocking those progesterone receptors. Now, fortunately, it's a dynamic situation. Those keys are going in and out of the receptor, in and out of the receptor. So when the false key comes out of the receptor, if we have a good guy key, progesterone, lined up in front of the receptor, then that key can go in, turn the lock, and open the door. And that's the whole premise around progesterone supplementation for mifepristone chemical abortion reversal, is that we stack the deck. We have more of the good guide molecules, the progesterone keys lined up in front of the receptors, so then when the mifepristone dislodges from the receptor, the likelihood is that a progesterone molecule will lodge onto that receptor, cause the good progesterone effects. And we maintain those levels until the mifepristone washes out of the system, which can take several days because you have metabolites that have long half-lives. So probably about 5 days till you get to a pretty significantly low level. And then we advocate treating with progesterone at least a total of 2 weeks or the end of the first trimester. Why is that? Because we know that a lot of these women do have subchorionic hemorrhages. They have had some effect of the mifepristone, and therefore the placenta needs to heal, so we think extra progesterone is going to be necessary to allow that to heal and to allow the resolution of the subchorionic hemorrhages. These are our stats, and actually have a revision here. Heartbeat International reports that they have documentation for over 5,000 babies born after successful mifepristone chemical abortion reversals. We've helped women in all 50 states and in about 70 countries all around the world. Our survival comparison, if no treatment at all is given, then 25% at best will survive the exposure to mifepristone. With our best treatments, our large study that Jim discussed that was published in 2018 of over 250 successful reversals shows that with our best protocol, 64 to 68% survival rate. Now you might wonder, how did we come up with this 25% figure of survival? Because as you know, as being good Catholics, you know it would be unethical to conduct a study that was a randomized controlled trial with a placebo group, right? Because we'd be dooming those babies to die. So we won't conduct that research, and we haven't, and we don't plan to. However, we have utilized the old literature, the initial studies of RU486 before they introduced the second drug, because their initial intent was just to use the mifepristone by itself. And so we have data from those studies, and my colleague Dr. Mary Davenport and some of the rest of our group, we published a study in 2017 describing those studies and analyzing them and coming up with this 25% figure, which is a generous figure. And it's based on studies where they actually did ultrasound after giving the mifepristone, and then the babies who are still alive, they of course aborted surgically. Now, some of these studies did not give a very long period of time to see if the mifepristone had failed in its effort to abort the baby. So this may be an overestimation, because if you waited longer, then some of those babies would continue to die. However, we felt that this was a very defensible number, and this is one we've not been criticized by our opponents. We've criticized a lot of what we do, but not this figure. And so we think this is very defensible, and this is what we'll use in our future research as we go along. People are often worried about birth defects. Well, the birth defect rate is no greater than the general population. It was 2.5% in our study, and in the general population, it's taken to be about 2 to 3%. So we're very, very happy with that. And we were a little bit surprised, but not too surprised, that the preterm delivery rate was significantly lower compared to the general population. In the US, about 10% of all babies are born preterm before 37 weeks. Ours was only 2.7%. We think, of course, that's because progesterone is effective at preventing preterm delivery. And there have been some studies back and forth with 17-hydroxyprogesterone caparate, McKenna, but my feeling is that probably in those studies, the McKenna was not started early enough, and perhaps the dosing wasn't quite what it should have been. These women have started pretty early, of course, and so we think that that's what really makes a difference, and hopefully, though, we'll get around to learning that for treating women with any preterm delivery risk. And we've had a lot of opposition from the medical establishment. Dr. Mitchell Crennan, he's in the Department of OBGYN at my alma mater, UC Davis, and he published a study that he said would disprove APR. He came out in an article with NPR, stating essentially that. He said, quote, "I want to own that." So his primary purpose in designing this study was to disprove abortion pill reversal. That's all he was out to do. And he canceled the study ostensibly because of safety concerns. I want to touch a little bit about this study, because especially those who are medical will be hearing about this, and this will be used as, quote, evidence that abortion pill reversal is, quote, unsafe. Well, first of all, let's look at the numbers of the patients. He did a pre-trial power analysis, which is a statistical analysis to determine how many patients should be enrolled in the study. And he determined he needed 20 in each group. And he was going to have two groups. One was the placebo group, one was an active treatment group. Both groups would receive mifepristone, and then the placebo group would just get a placebo, no active drug. The active group would get progesterone, and he was going to compare them. And he calculated that he would need 20 in each group in order to achieve statistical significance. Then in the study itself, if you look at it at the very top in the methods section, it says in his study, we intended to enroll 40 patients. So that should make you wonder right off the top, was he really serious about this study? Because if he needed 40 patients, but only intended to enroll 40, doesn't that seem curious? He was not allowing for anybody to drop out of the study, anybody to move away from out of the area. Because if you had only enrolled 40 people and one of them got hit by a car and was no longer in the study, your study would no longer be statistically significant because you calculated you needed 40. So most studies, what they do is they'll calculate how many they need, and then they'll recruit more than that. They'll enroll maybe 60 or 80 in order to have that buffer. But he didn't intend to do that. So that's the very curious first thing. Then the study was stopped because of 3 women who called 911 because of bleeding. He called it heavy bleeding. And they went to the emergency department. We'll talk first about the one who was in the progesterone group. This was a true APR patient, right? She received progesterone. Well, when she got to the emergency department, it says in the study, no further treatment was needed. In other words, she really didn't need to be in the emergency department. She panicked, which is fine. I'm sure many people would panic in those situations. She called 911, but she really didn't need emergency treatment. So that was no reason to stop a study, nor any reason to cast aspersions on abortion pill reversal. The other 2 patients were in the placebo group. They did not get progesterone. They only got mifepristone. Both of them needed emergency surgical abortions, and one of them needed a blood transfusion. And after that one that needed a blood transfusion, that's when they stopped the study. So you see, the study was really stopped because of 2 women in the placebo group who had heavy amounts of bleeding and needed emergency treatment. These were not patients who got progesterone. So what this study really proved, or suggested, because it was not statistically significant, was that taking mifepristone and doing nothing else, not taking progesterone and not taking the second drug, may be dangerous in terms of bleeding risks. But it did not suggest that taking a progesterone in order to reverse your chemical abortion is dangerous. And in the study itself, it actually says that, that taking mifepristone and doing nothing else could be considered risky. But the spin afterwards, and including Dr. Crennan in interviews he gave, was that because of this study, we should consider abortion pill reversal unsafe and dangerous, and we should not be recommending it. You can see his study itself did not suggest that at all. How about the effectiveness in this study? Well, again, it was not statistically significant, but the effectiveness was that 80% of the women who received the progesterone had continued pregnancies at 2 weeks, which was the endpoint of the study, 80%, while 30% of those who were in the placebo group had continuing pregnancies. Again, not statistically significant numbers, but very similar to our numbers, don't you think, of 68% versus 25%. So you can see that really the Crennan study, although not statistically significant, really does support our contentions that abortion pill reversal is effective and that it is safe. So that's an important thing I want you to remember from the Crennan study. Now, Dr. Daniel Grossman, also from the wacky land of California, he's at UCSF, and he's on this, the staff there of the Department of OBGYN. He's also part of the Bixby Center. The Bixby Center is a center at UCSF whose sole purpose really is to export contraception and abortion to third world countries. They are pro-death imperialists, and that's just basically what we do. Dr. Grossman, along with Dr. Crennan and others, have been vocal critics of abortion pill reversal. And he was quoted in this article in slate.com. Grossman says that the progesterone and APR probably won't hurt a woman if she's under medical supervision, i.e. he's conceding here that it's safe, right? But he's concerned that advertising the procedure could mislead the public about the prevalence of abortion regret. So this explains exactly why that Dr. Grossman, Dr. Crennan, ACOG, ACLU, Planned Parenthood have come after us with such vigor and are so vehemently opposed to us, because they fear that if the general public is aware that some women actually do change their minds, some women do actually have a change of heart, some women actually do want a second chance at choice, that puts a dent in the narrative that abortion is a great good for all women. Because if abortion is a great good, why would anybody change her mind, right? If it's a great good, everybody would be all for it, and there would be no misgivings at all. There would be no desire for a second chance at choice. So this is what Dr. Donna Harrison has described as our poking the bear. We poke the bear with abortion pill reversal, and now they're very angry and they're coming after us like gangbusters. And they charge that it's junk science. We say, no, it's not junk science, it's new science. Anytime something is novel and new, you don't come out right away with randomized controlled trials. When CPR was first brought on the scene and made part of the recommendations for someone who has a heart attack, they did not have any randomized controlled trials. In fact, there are still no randomized controlled trials, because it would be absurd to have a trial where, oh, he went down with a heart attack. Let's see, oh, he's in the placebo group, so we're just going to stand here and watch and see what happens, see if his heart restarts on its own, right? No, so you don't do that. And this APR is essentially CPR for the preborn baby whose life is being threatened. So it does not make sense that you have to have a randomized placebo-controlled trial for every single thing you do. But we have biologic logic. We know that in the initial studies of mifepristone as a molecule, that they determined that it competitively inhibits progesterone, and that in the system where they had little receptors in the test tube, that when they raised the concentration of mifepristone, it won the battle to the receptor. When they raised the concentration of progesterone, it won the battle of the receptor. We have animal studies. Dr. Stephen Samut at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, has developed a rat model of mifepristone chemical abortion, and he's done a subsequent experiment of demonstrating that the progesterone does indeed reverse the chemical abortion. And he shows that it doesn't just prevent it, it reverses it, because in the rats, he's able to determine with vaginal probes that they actually have blood in the vagina that is very similar between the ones who have mifepristone without progesterone, that complete the abortions, and the amount of blood in the vagina with those who get the mifepristone, then get the progesterone. So it actually, the chemical abortion actually does start, but then it's reversed. And then, of course, we have our data. More than 5,000 babies are not silent in their lives. How can you deny that abortion pill reversal doesn't work if you have 5,000 people who otherwise wouldn't be alive? And then we have our large study that was published in 2018. And we have more studies that are planned. Right now we are planning to do a randomized controlled trial, but it would be a randomized controlled trial of 2 active treatments, oral progesterone and vaginal progesterone. Unfortunately, the FDA has stalled our study for the last 2 years and hasn't given us a reason for not approving it at this point. So we're looking into see how we can get around that. We're going to be looking at a multinational study where in other countries, fortunately and sadly, it'll be easier to conduct abortion pill reversal research than here in the United States of America, which purports to be a free and democratic nation. And people do commonly change their minds. Some of our critics say, well, that women, this is what Dr. Grossman has been quoted as saying, that women rarely, if ever, change their minds and want to reverse their chemical abortions. Well, lots of studies show that up to 10% of women have second thoughts. And in fact, a study by Dr. Crennan himself in the UK, where women had taken both chemical abortifacients, the mifepristone followed by the misoprostol, there was a group of about 90 of them who found themselves to be pregnant. And so they studied, well, what did they do? And 10% of those women chose to continue their pregnancies, even though, although mifepristone does not cause birth defects, the second drug, misoprostol, does increase the risk of birth defects. They knew they had an increased risk of birth defects, and they decided to continue their pregnancies anyway. These were women when the concrete situation was right there in their face, and they chose to continue their pregnancies. So here's the QR code in case you didn't get it, and we're now time for questions. So because this is being recorded, I have the recording mic. I'm going to repeat the question. So when is it too late to attempt reversal? We've had success at treating women up to 72 hours after the ingestion of mifepristone. However, we feel that the sooner the better. And right now, because the Heartbeat International Abortion Pill Rescue Network is doing such a great job, the vast majority of women are started on progesterone within 24 hours of the ingestion of mifepristone.
Have studies been done on other animals than rats?
To my knowledge, studies have not been done on any other animals besides rats.
George, what do you say to doctors or other prescribers who may be hesitant to prescribe this? They're worried about ACOG's opposition, or they're worried about lawsuits, et cetera.
It's a very legitimate concern to be concerned about lawsuits because we live in a litigious society, of course. But I can tell you that I am not aware of a single lawsuit that has been filed against a physician who's provided abortion pill reversal treatment. So why is that? Well, it's because we've been extremely careful and diligent since the inception. We knew that this would be attacked. We knew this would be very controversial. And so we've been very, very careful in enacting protocols and making sure that we have very good communication with the women whom we are treating, making sure that we have good follow-up, and making sure that we practice good medicine. Now, all of you who are in healthcare right now, if you're half aware, you know that this is a time of persecution of Catholics, of other Christians, and other people who are pro-life. That's just the way it is. And so we're never going to please ACOG, we're never going to please AMA, we're not going to please the ACLU, and we're not going to please Planned Parenthood. So we shouldn't pretend to try to please them. I'm not saying to be disrespectful, I'm saying to always be professional, but I'm saying we have to get to the point where we say, I don't give a darn, and really don't concern ourselves with what they're doing, or what they're trying to do, what they're trying to do to us. It doesn't mean we don't take precautions, and we're very careful. You want to make sure, of course, you have malpractice insurance. You want to make sure that you practice good medicine, that if you're doing abortion pill reversal, that this is something that you really know what you're doing, and that you know how progesterone works, you know what you have to do if you can't perform a DNC yourself, how you would refer a woman, you know how to monitor them, and you have to have good systems in place for good communication, especially for emotional support for these women. And oftentimes that can be in your practice, or it can be working in conjunction with the Pregnancy Help Center, where they have these counselors there who are there all the time, who can be there to mentor and to guide them. But I think ultimately it's a mission, and we're all drawn to healthcare as a mission, not just as a career. And so we have to put mission first. And we have to know that our first mission is always to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so he promised that we would be persecuted. So if you're not being persecuted, you're doing something wrong in your lives, especially in this day and age. So that doesn't mean every single one of you has to provide abortion pill reversal, but it means each and every one of us has to step out of our comfort zone. And for those of us who are medical professionals are able to provide it, I ask you to strongly consider it. And it's going to be one of the most rewarding parts of your career. For me, it certainly has been to help these women who are in crisis, and where you literally save the physical life of the preborn baby, but you also save the spiritual life of the mother. And so you really are saving two lives with abortion pill reversal. So I can't think of a better thing, and I would gladly go to jail and be able to say that I went to jail because I helped save lives.
Thank you. Regarding the Krenin study, why is an illogical conclusion accepted by the medical establishment? I'm an MD. I'm seeing a lot of this, also regarding transgender studies.
Okay, well, why is that? ACOG is a self-described advocacy organization. They have that in their position statements. So they're not really a professional organization anymore. AMA is an advocacy organization, and all of these transgender, pro-abortion, pro-death policies are pushed from the top down. ACOG has never queried their membership as to how they should stand on abortion. It's all from the top down. All of these organizations were infiltrated in a similar fashion. It includes the American Academy of Family Physicians. All of them were infiltrated in a similar fashion by pro-death liberal activists who infiltrated, took over these organizations, and then pushed things from the top down. So that's why the ACOG and others use the Crennan study in order to put a negative spin on abortion pill reversal. And that's why when you speak out, you are persecuted. And that's why we have this mess of transgender medicine, and the AMA and the American Association of Pediatricians supporting giving children hormone blockers and hormones and mutilating surgeries. While in other countries, they're putting the brakes on all these programs. England just stopped their program. Belgium, one of the most liberal countries in Europe, just stopped this program. So we're seeing it throughout this. We saw in California during COVID, maybe in other states, I'm not sure, but California passed a law that if a physician gave, quote, misinformation or false information about COVID-19, that the license would be susceptible to suspension. Now, how chilling an effect will that have on practicing physicians? Just extreme. When I was, during the COVID pandemic, we had these town hall meetings where the county doctors would meet virtually and discuss, the latest developments in the COVID-19 pandemic. There was an infectious disease doctor who said, well, any doctor who's prescribing hydroxychloroquine should be reported to the medical board. And I thought, that's a very chilling comment. And that's exactly the advocacy, agenda-driven mindset that the mainstream medical societies have now. And that's exactly why we're seeing this in all these avenues. And that's exactly why we have to stand up. And CMA is part of the Alliance of Hippocratic Medicine. And that's very, very important because we have to stand up and we have to boldly proclaim that we're only going to do things that help our patients. We're not going to do things that harm our patients. We're not going to kill our patients. And we're going to stand up for what's true and what's right and not just for what's politically and driven by any agenda.
There are several questions about the amount of progesterone and how long to take it and the protocol. Can you go over again where people can find that, or just briefly state what your preferred protocol is?
Sure. With our large study, we had a signal of about 30 patients from a clinic in Orange County, California. They were giving what I later tagged as high-dose progesterone protocol. And they were giving 400 milligrams twice a day for 3 days, orally, always with food, and then 400 milligrams at night till the end of the first trimester. So that's the protocol that I've adopted and that the network has adopted as the official protocol. Currently, I'm using even higher doses, and this is because of my experience meeting with physicians in Switzerland, where in Switzerland and some European countries, the mifepristone dose, instead of 200 milligrams, what we give here in the United States, is 600 milligrams. So it's 3 times the dose. So they're giving higher doses of progesterone in order to combat the higher dose of the mifepristone. And the women are tolerating it very, very well. And there are data from the 1990s in France. They were using very high doses of progesterone that were not tolerated so well taken over many months, but were tolerated over weeks, which is what we're using. So because of that, now what I advocate and what I do personally is 600 milligrams twice a day for the first 2 days, then 400 milligrams twice a day for 2 days, and then 400 milligrams at night until the end of the first trimester, or a minimum of 2 weeks, whichever is longer. And that again is to allow healing of the placenta in case there's a subchorionic hemorrhage. Now, this has been very well tolerated, and I think it's more effective. Again, oral progesterone should always be given with food because that increases absorption by at least 50%. Some others are using vaginal progesterone, and I was, a couple weeks ago, I said I was in Nebraska, clinic there, Sancta Familia in Omaha, is using, starting off with an injection, which is how we used to do it in the past, and then following up with vaginal progesterone at higher doses. So we're actually going to be doing a study in conjunction with them, looking at their data. The injection theoretically has a lot of advantages, but when we found that the high-dose oral protocol was working so well, because women often are a little hesitant to take injections, it's an uncomfortable injection into the gluteus muscle. Of course, a woman who's motivated to save her baby will do almost anything, including a painful injection. So we want to really figure out what's the best protocol and the safest, as well as the best tolerated.
There's a question about off-label use. Do you have concerns about this being an off-label use of progesterone?
That's a common criticism, off-label use. But for those of you who are not medical, probably 20 to 30% of all prescriptions are off-label. And so what does that mean? The label is the official FDA indication. It means when a drug is studied, an application is submitted to the FDA, we want to use terbutaline for asthma. And terbutaline was approved for asthma. Well, it turns out we find out that terbutaline, not only does it relax bronchial muscles, which allows asthmatics to breathe better, it also relaxes the uterine muscle, which therefore can be used for preterm labor, to stop preterm labor. These days, terbutaline is rarely, if ever, used for asthma. It's probably used 90% of the time for preterm labor, but that is an off-label use of it. So and mifepristone itself is currently used off-label because it's being used at past 10 weeks gestation. And the previous indication, as I said, was for 9 weeks of gestation. And they were pushing the envelope then, using it past that. And so the mifepristone has been used off-label many times. So for them to criticize us of using progesterone off-label makes really no sense at all, when off-label use is so accepted, so common. And progesterone has been used in pregnancy safely for over 50 years. So it has a very, very long track record of safety. The progesterone that we advocate using is bioidentical progesterone. It's the progesterone molecule that is identical to what the woman's body makes. So I have no concern whatsoever about using it in an off-label fashion.
Can you explain the difference between the morning after pill and mifepristone?
Sure. So the morning after pill is taken with a contraceptive intent. That is, a woman does not know that she's pregnant. She's had, quote, unprotected intercourse and takes it in an attempt to prevent pregnancy. While mifepristone is taken by a woman who knows she's pregnant and takes it with the express intent of killing her preborn baby. So that's the fundamental difference. Now there's some nuances of the morning after pill that we can go into. I don't have time to go into very deeply. There's good literature in the Lineker Journal of the Catholic Medical Association, some great articles about it. But there are essentially two types of morning after pills. We'll talk about the first one, which is the newer one called ulipristal, also known as Ella. Ulipristal is different. It's approved up to 5 days after, quote, unprotected intercourse. Why is it approved so far out? Well, it's because ulipristal is a progesterone receptor blocker, just like mifepristone. So it's essentially taking mifepristone, it's just a slightly different molecule. So it has the same effects of mifepristone, it blocks progesterone receptors, and because of that, it will cause the abortion of a very new early pregnancy. By blocking the progesterone receptors, it will also make the lining of the uterus inhospitable to a preborn embryo trying to attach, and it probably will also interfere with ovulation by blocking progesterone receptors. But there's no doubt about it that ulipristal has a strong abortifacient potential. The other types are progestins, and they're not progesterone blockers, they're actually progesterone analogs. They act like progesterones. So they're keys that go in, turn the lock, and open the door. So you wonder, well, how are they going to be a problem? Well, it turns out that when you study women who've taken the progestins like Plan B, that they probably have faulty ovulations if it's taken before ovulation. And if it's taken after ovulation, it probably interferes with the lining of the uterus by making it inhospitable to the preborn embryo. So there's probably a high likelihood that the morning after pill is abortifacient much of the time. Probably not all the time. Probably there's some instances where it actually does inhibit ovulation. But by causing faulty ovulations and by causing change in the lining of the uterus, that the Plan B is likely to be abortifacient at least some of the time. The same can be said of regular oral contraceptives.
There's a specific question on how has the medical community received the 2023 DeBassy scoping review on APR?
So yes, DeBassy and others published a scoping analysis of APR in the Lineker Journal in 2023. If you haven't read that, I'd recommend you go to that. He's also put up a very nice website called APR Science, where if you can look it up with the search engine, or if you go to our website, stenoinstitute.org, and go to links, there'll be a link to that website. And he's cataloged all of the studies related to APR and has put them on there. And as far as the medical profession's response to it, I haven't seen much response. I think there's just a lot of ignorance about it. People are not aware of it, even pro-life Catholic physicians. So, but it's a good thing for you to make yourself aware of it and to go read some of that. I think would be very helpful.
There's a question or comment that it's becoming more difficult to publish studies that challenge the abortion agenda in mainstream journals. And it seems to be easy to get bad studies published in mainstream journals if they support the agenda. The Crennan study comes to mind. What do you suggest we do?
Keep trying. Now the thing is, and I've experienced this with our studies, you need to be strategic, because if you plan to go, let's say, for the quote high impact journals, every time they look at your data and then drag it along and then they refuse to publish it, you waste about 2 months. And so you kind of have to be strategic how many of these low likely journals you should submit to on the chance that maybe one of them will publish it, and then you'll get a greater audience. So maybe 1 or 2, and then have a reasonable journal that where you think you can publish. And the 2 reasonable journals that come to mind immediately are the Lineker and Issues in Law and Medicine. And both of them are peer-reviewed journals, so they're very solid journals, and there's nothing wrong at all with getting published in them. The only reservation is that they're not considered, quote, high-impact journals, so people outside of our circles aren't going to be reading them. But I think the most important thing is to get them published in peer-reviewed journals, get it out there, because once it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, then it's sort of your flag in the sand, and I was going to say they can't take it away, but they actually can. But at least you're firmly footed, you're published, and then you start getting some splash in the general media. Now, just another comment of that about the bias. There have been now 2 pro-life, essentially pro-life articles that have been pulled from journals. One was by Dr. Harrison and her group that looked at Medicaid data of women who had either surgical or chemical abortions and then went to the emergency department. And their studies showed that, first of all, there's a lot of miscoding. And when they get to the emergency department, a lot of these complications of abortions are being coded as complications of pregnancy, so they're being undercounted. Number 2, they found out that the visits to the emergency departments for complications related to the abortions were higher in the chemical abortion group than in the surgical abortion group. So very, very counter to what they say that, quote, chemical abortion, or they call it medication abortion, is very safe, and it's safer. It's not safer. And a good study out of Finland shows that the complications with chemical abortions 5 times those of surgical abortions. And then there was another article by Callum Miller, who's a friend, a pro-life friend from the UK, where he published data on abortion complications in a third world country, and he found that he published a very good study looking at that, and his paper was withdrawn from a prominent journal. I think it was the British Medical Journal, and essentially because it did not follow the party line that abortion is a great good. So we're going to be seeing more of this. So I think we're going to have to utilize our two good journals, maybe start other journals. We're going to have to start our own medical schools. There's an effort underway right now at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, to start a pro-life medical school that's authentically Catholic and that is would be associated with the Padre Pio Hospital in Italy. Right now, their biggest challenge is fundraising, and lack of funds may keep them from starting it, but I think we're going to need to do more of that. We're going to need to, if we can, to convert our Catholic medical schools that are not so Catholic into being more Catholic. That's probably a bigger uphill battle than starting a medical school, unfortunately, but I think it's an endeavor worth taking. We need to take back our church and our schools.
Can you talk about the abortion pill reversal providers? Are they? Is it easy to get in touch with a provider through the abortion pill reversal all over the country, all over the world? And there's another question related to that. How about crisis pregnancy centers providing the progesterone themselves? You think that's a good idea? And there are also questions about the cost of progesterone. My understanding is it's generally pretty cheap, but is it covered by insurance when patients have insurance?
Okay, we'll start in reverse order. So most often it is covered by insurance. Some states, Medicaid will not cover progesterone. They'll cover Depo-Provera and progestins, but not progesterone. But in those cases, we have grassroots efforts where the pregnancy help centers usually provide the funding for the medication, and they'll provide the ultrasound. I've never heard of a case of any woman being denied abortion pill reversal because of lack of funds. So that doesn't seem to be an issue. But it's important for all of you and your organizations, if you're in the Knights of Columbus, to truly put this at forefront and to provide funding and to support your local pregnancy help centers. The pregnancy help centers that are medical often are providing abortion pill reversal, and they're doing a great job at it. The ones that are not medical, they often will partner with a physician in the community who will provide the medical care while they supply all the support. Because these women need a lot of support, because remember, they're very psychologically fragile. And we know that there are progesterone receptors in the brain, so I think that the mifepristone blocking the progesterone receptors in the brain does have an effect. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And so just as easily as they go from being the killer to the savior, they sometimes go back to the killer because they panic. And it's like a suicide situation. They feel boxed in a corner, that they have no way out of that situation except killing their preborn baby, which is kind of a surrogate for killing themselves in my mind. So we have to be there and constantly support them, just like you would a suicide patient. It's not just, okay, you're off the ledge, you're good, go on with your life. No, you have to still provide counseling and support. And so the same thing for these women. As far as in the network, I believe there are more than 2,500 physicians in the network in the U.S., and it varies from area to area. In some areas we have lots of practitioners who are part of the network, in other areas less. In some countries there may be only a couple of docs. So we really need to recruit more docs. So if you know any doctors who are OBGYNs, family physicians, we have internists, any specialty where you could feel comfortable learning how to treat women who have threatened miscarriages, pediatricians certainly, then they can be in the network and we'll give the additional training they might need. But it's just a matter of using progesterone in a very straightforward fashion as you would with a threatened miscarriage situation. So as long as you know how to do that and you have the backup necessary in order to take care of complications, then you should be able to provide very competent, caring, and compassionate care to these women.
Do you know of any research being conducted to reverse the prostaglandin, the misoprostol, that's the second pill?
Yes, so we're looking into how to reverse the misoprostol, which again is a prostaglandin analog. And there is a veterinary medicine drug approved in canines that blocks certain prostaglandins. So we're going to be looking at that. But Dr. Samut, in his rat lab, the next experiment actually that he's planning and that I'm going to be cooperating with is to actually see, although progesterone doesn't directly inhibit or block the effect of the prostaglandins, because it indirectly does inhibit the actions of the prostaglandins, because what the prostaglandins do is they cause contractions. Progesterone relaxes the muscle. So they really are competing in that sense, even though they're not competing for the very same keyhole. Well, we're going to see if giving progesterone to rats who've been given prostaglandin will actually prevent some of the actions of the prostaglandin. So that's the next thing on the horizon that we're looking at right now. But unfortunately, in humans, there are no drugs right now that we know of that will block the effect of the prostaglandins. We are later on also going to be trying to use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And again, they don't block the effects of the prostaglandins, but what they do is they block the production of endogenous prostaglandins. So at least you won't be getting more prostaglandin made inside the body. So that might be another wrinkle that we add to that. We'll be studying that in rats first. There also is the idea of doing drug or data mining. And this is something that's relatively new, but pretty exciting in medicine, where you, using artificial intelligence and other search engine kinds of means, you essentially just search the world's literature and you find out, you look for signals in studies where, let's say they were studying a drug for, let's just say, high blood pressure, and they found that in pregnant women who took it, they miscarried less, or certain effects like that. And so you find these signals, and then it hones you in, and you can start studying that drug. And we know that lots of drugs work in different systems in the body, and so this might be a way to discover an approved drug and provide a second indication for it.
In many Latin American countries, the great majority of abortions are done with misoprostol only. Is that your understanding? And do you have any comment on that?
Yes, so for a couple of reasons, in Latin America and other third world countries, they often use misoprostol as the sole abortifacient agent for two reasons. In many of these countries, mifepristone itself is illegal. And the second reason is that mifepristone is much more expensive than misoprostol, the prostaglandin analog. And misoprostol is on the WHO list of, quote, essential medicines. And it's on there purportedly because it is a very effective medicine for postpartum hemorrhage, although you have oxytocin for that. But sometimes it can be useful. But there's probably other reasons why they want it on that list, and the same reason they want mifepristone on that list too. So yeah, so that's an issue because we can't reverse it, and that's the reason why we want to study agents that we could use to block the effects of misoprostol and stop those chemical abortions for women who change their minds after taking the misoprostol.
You talked about this a bit before, but there's a question or a couple questions about how can we get the word out on this? How can we better let the public and the parishes and everybody know about it?
Yeah, so I think, all of us has a sphere of influence, and if you're physicians, you have colleagues, you have medical societies, and you have patients, and you can spread the word about it in that way. If you're nurses or other allied health professionals, or if you're patients, you can talk to your doctors when you go in to have your annual exam. You could say, hey, do you know about abortion pill reversal? No, I don't. Well, can I give you some information about it? And give them information about Steno Institute. And they can go on our website and read about it. And you can advocate for it. When you, around the family dinner table, you can talk to your children, your grandchildren, so that they know about it. So that if, God forbid, they get into a situation where they feel pressure to take mifepristone, they know that it is reversible. Or if they're counseling their friends, if they have a friend who gets in that situation, they know about it. Because we want that idea to be in everybody's head so that if a woman makes a mistake, takes mifepristone, and then regrets that mistake, she already knows what she can do. She doesn't have to scramble around and start searching on the internet and wasting time. And we want her mentors, her friends, her confidants to already know about it, so that when she calls up and says, I did a terrible thing, I say, well, it's okay, I know about abortion pill reversal. We want it to be ready to go. We want it in every emergency room, because remember we talked about it's like CPR. Well, we want it in an emergency room so that that'll be the place for women to go, so they don't have to find a doctor, so they can just go into their emergency room. And we're working with different emergency departments right now to see if they'll have it as an established protocol. So everybody has contacts, a network, a sphere of influence that you can instruct, that you can teach, that you can lead. And that's my call for you today, is to go out and do that, and to spread the word about APR amongst those that you influence.
There were quite a few legal arena questions. I know there's some lawyers in the room. Can you comment on the lawsuit involving California versus Heartbeat?
Sure. So the state of California has sued Heartbeat International as well as Real Options Obria Clinic in the Bay Area. And this is it sounds very similar to the COVID law I told you about, where they're suing them for, quote, misinformation and for providing unsafe medical treatments to reverse chemical abortions. So you can see this is just another tactic by the state of California in order to suppress things that go against the pro-death agenda. And that case is just getting started. And the Thomas More Law Society, Andy's here representing them. They have Chuck Lamandry and Paul Jonah, two good friends of mine who are leading that case. And I anticipate that we will prevail in that case.
Can you comment or discuss the Supreme Court case the case that was recently presented to the Supreme Court?
Officially comment on that case because I'm a plaintiff in that, and so the lawyers representing me don't want me to say anything. So, but essentially that case was, remember, well, I guess I didn't say much about, but I told you about the FDA approval of mifepristone. Well, it turns out that the FDA approved mifepristone breaking laws and not following their own protocols and their own procedures. And how was that? Well, the FDA has a policy that you don't approve a new drug unless you have a randomized placebo-controlled trial. And again, what that means, for those who are not medical, is that you have two groups, in the case of mifepristone, who wanted chemical abortions, and one group gets randomized to receive mifepristone, the other group does not receive mifepristone, and they don't get to choose, and then you see how they turn out. So in this case, they did not do a randomized controlled trial, and if you look at the SPITZ trial, S-P-I-T-Z, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine and was the study that was used to approve it, it was not a randomized placebo-controlled trial. So they broke their own rules there. Then the other thing is that they approved it for use in women under the age of 18 without testing it on children. And you know, if those of you who are in medicine know that the FDA is huge these days on that every new drug has to be tested on children, right? That's just something that, unless it's an Alzheimer drug or something like that. But anything that might be used in children has to be tested on children, which is a good thing because we want to know how it affects children. Well, they didn't test it on children, and that they approved it in children. So those are the two reasons why it should not have been approved, but it was pushed through by the Clinton administration because of the agenda, the pro-death agenda. The next part of the lawsuit is that the REMS, the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategies, which is a program that was put in place because they knew it was a dangerous drug, and required them to report all complications to the FDA, and required in-person administration, et cetera, those have been sequentially peeled off. So the first one that was peeled off, I guess the first one was that it was the limits of gestation were relaxed, and it was given later in the pregnancy. The second was that you didn't have to report complications unless it was death. So unless the woman died, and I'm not talking about the death of the preborn baby, I'm talking about death of the woman. Unless the woman died, they did not have to report any complications to the FDA. And then lastly, they took off the restrictions that you had to be person-to-person witnessed ingestion, and now you can get a prescription at Walmart or Walgreens or CVS, or you can go online. So the lawsuit also involves those stating that these were not substantiated by the science, that these restrictions were lifted that will harm women. And so that's where we are. The initial ruling in Texas was favorable to our side, and then it was appealed, and part of the case went to the Supreme Court. They're not going to decide on the entire thing, but just on part of it, and that decision should come out in June. And the plaintiffs, there are 3 other individual physicians besides myself. There's the APLOG, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. There's the Coptic Medical Association. There's the Christian Medical Dental Association, and there's the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, of which the CMA is a charter member. So all of us are part of that lawsuit, and we're praying that it will be resolved in our favor. After the Supreme Court decision, it'll bounce back to the lower court, so this is going to be probably a couple of year process until we get anything out of it. In the meantime, states have been stockpiling misoprostol in their own panic because they can't believe a world without abortion. So if in case mifepristone is outlawed, then states like California have a large stockpile already of misoprostol, the second drug, in order to use that as an abortifacient. Of course, what will happen is that, assuming we prevail, they'll do a randomized controlled placebo-controlled trial to get it reapproved. That'll take some time, but I'm sure they're already planning that now. But it will still be a great victory for us because it'll expose, once again, the agenda and how decisions are made in American medicine, not based on science, not based on what's best for the patient, but what's based on the agenda, and many times it's a pro-death, anti-Christian agenda.
Can you address concerns people might have about taking progesterone and risks of breast cancer, probably related to the knowledge that birth control pills and other progestogens are associated with an increased risk for breast cancer?
Yeah, so that's a great question, a great concern, and that's one of the screening questions we have when we have an appointment with abortion pill reversal. Do you have a history of breast cancer? And it's only been a handful who have. And so we have to have a good informed consent discussion because, as Jim said, the progestins, which are the progesterone-like molecules that are not progesterone itself, and birth control pills, as well as hormone replacement therapy with non-bioidentical hormones, have been shown to increase the risk of breast cancer. We know that progesterone does increase lobule proliferation, and that's why women in the first trimester of pregnancy will get tender, swollen breasts, because that's a natural physiologic process. And so theoretically, women who have what are called progesterone receptor positive cancers may be at increased risk of those cancers advancing if they take progesterone. However, again, that theoretical risk has to be balanced with the benefits, and so that's why it's a very careful, informed consent discussion. So you ask about if the woman has no history of breast cancer, then the issue is moot, and you don't have to worry about it. And I would say 99-point-something% don't have a history of breast cancer because these are generally younger women. But the ones that do, then you would ask about, well, was your cancer progesterone receptor positive? If it's progesterone receptor positive, then you have to counsel that this may, at least theoretically, increase your risk of your cancer advancing. So you have to decide if that's something you want to do. And just like a woman who sometimes chooses to forego chemotherapy because she wants to protect her baby, she might choose to go ahead and treat, even though. And so I would have a very careful, informed consent discussion in that very tiny subpopulation. But otherwise, in general, there's no evidence that a bioidentical progesterone, the progesterone the body makes, is going to cause cancers de novo in women given abortion pill reversal. That's just not going to be an issue.
And you could add to that that the carrying a pregnancy to term lowers your risk for breast cancer greatly. So
Yes. So that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So the data are very, very strong that a delivery of a baby before 32 weeks increases a woman's risk of breast cancer. And that term delivery, a delivery that goes past 32 weeks, particularly in the very first pregnancy, has a protective effect. It makes a woman cancer resistant. So we know then that abortions, and especially the data on surgical abortions are greater, that surgical abortions, particularly before the first term pregnancy, will increase the risk of breast cancer. So it's almost certain that with chemical abortions, that having a chemical abortion before the first term pregnancy will increase the woman's risk of breast cancer. So with abortion pill reversal, you do two things. One, you eliminate that risk of the abortion, increasing the risk of breast cancer, and you give her a term pregnancy, which is cancer protective, so you actually have two things going in her favor to decrease her overall risk. So her risk of breast cancer will statistically be lower than it would have been if she had actually never gotten pregnant. So two wins there.
do you know of any longitudinal health studies, long-term studies on women who've had chemical abortions?
So the longitudinal studies so far are few and far between because they don't want to study it. And so we don't see a lot of those. There are some starting to come out of China and India and a few other countries showing a trend towards an increased breast cancer risk.
Well, I think we've covered almost all, if not all, the general questions, and I'd like to thank George for his great presentation. Gave us a whole lot of information, and he was kind enough to let us tape it, and it'll be up on the MGCMA website, mgcma.org, within a month or so. And there was a question about whether the previous talks are available on there, and they are. So look at the mgcma.org if you want to watch this again. Thank you, George.